Pastor John, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, John.
How was the drive? I know it was a long drive for you coming down here.
Well, we had moved out to Valencia about 7-8 years ago. So everything's far. And then when there's traffic or an accident, but that's LA for you.
So I didn't know you moved to Valencia. Why did you guys move out there? That's so like far north, even more north than where your church is right now.
Right. We were living in Arcadia, actually, when he first planted the Lighthouse LA church. And that was great because I was neighbors with Ben. And we were there for 2 years. But our family needs, I think we needed a little more space. So we quickly found out that it was very expensive to find anywhere in that area. 4 daughters. So we looked out in Santa Clarita and found a home. And so we've been living there ever since.
Now, Pastor John, I got to ask you this question. I know it's going to be a tough question to answer, but what's your seasonal life right now? How old are you right now?
Well, I am 57, and we are now in the season of being grandparents, it is so much fun. I understand now why grandparents get happy just to even see your grandkid. I mean, it's not like they're doing anything. Grandson Benny's only a little over 1. But I get to babysit them from time to time, and they're at our church. So that's been a wonderful blessing. I think especially in the midst of some challenges, God was gracious to provide that for me and my wife.
Yeah. So you're in a totally different season of life now. Your grandparents. Has it totally changed being in the season of life now?
We still have a high school senior. So
that's your youngest?
That's our youngest.
Okay.
My 3rd and 4th daughters live at home. 3rd one graduated from college a couple years ago. But our last one now, she's doing college apps. Even last night, she was up late. So it's our last one. She's our baby. So my wife and I are like, oh, wow, we're getting ready to hit that stage of being empty nesters soon.
Wow. Did you think that this is what it would be like? You're almost going to be an empty nester officially now. Is this what you expected?
Well, there are a lot of things that I did not expect. I did not expect to have 4 daughters after growing up with just brothers.
Did you want a son or did you not care? Did your wife want a son?
So my dad was the oldest son, and his father was the only son and child of like 3 generations like that. So when I got married, and I don't think I was really, I didn't care so much for all the Korean cultural kind of expectations, but my grandmother, who was very, very Korean, at the end of her life, she said, daughters are best. And, I think that's true because I can see that even in my relationship with my mom. My 2 brothers were guys. We maybe don't have the sensitivity or even maybe the thought. And I see my daughters who even now, my oldest is 30. The next one is 27. And then the 3rd one is 23. The youngest is 17. And my mom said that she said that God knew that I needed a lot of love. And I think that's really true, especially with ministry and challenges. So I'm so grateful. We also went through a season of miscarriages. We lost 3 babies along the way. So for me, it was just, I'm just thankful that we have healthy kids.
Yeah.
And so, I have no regrets about that.
There's always the joke that God gives us daughters. I have 2 because every daughter means you need more sanctification. And so,
well, yeah, no, that's very true too. I have learned, I thought I was a patient person, and then I got married, and I still thought I was somewhat patient, and then I had 4 girls. And to this day, I realize God really is still sharpening me in that area.
Yeah. Pastor John, you've had a long history and experience in pastoral ministry. You're a very close friend to Pastor Ben Shin, and you're part of this group of what I call the first wave of EM pastors. And we've been talking about that a little bit on this podcast. You started at UCLA in college, and you and Ben were part of Grace on Campus, which was not a Korean or like Asian campus ministry, even though there were Asians there. And I think during that time, was KCF still there or did it not start? Okay. So instead of going to KCF, which was much more Korean, you and Ben decided to do Grace on campus. Why did you guys go there? And why did you guys like it better? Because typically, especially during that time, Koreans want to stick together. You know, we got to go where we're comfortable, where we're familiar. Why did you guys decide to do that?
Well, some maybe detail to that. I grew up at Grace Church. So for me, being involved with the Grace Church ministries was just a natural thing to do. I actually was not so much a part of the college ministries, maybe in the same way Ben was. I was actually serving on junior high staff at Grace Church. So for the first few years, that's what I was doing.
While you were in college?
Yes. So and then I stepped off of youth staff and just attended college ministry. And so I was involved with KACF by that time and gave a lot of my energy to KACF. Well, I still attended Grace Church, went to the college ministries, and but then I became an intern for the junior high ministry at Grace Church.
Who was the junior high pastor during that time?
So it was Chris Mueller was, well, okay, no, take that back. When I was the volunteer staff era, he was the pastor, but then he moved to the college ministry. So I was working with someone else when I was the intern and was there for about a year and then started seminary.
Wait, okay, but you said you grew up at Grace Community.
Yes.
Your parents decided to go to Grace Community, which is very odd. Again, especially in the 80s, Korean immigration is big. Most of them would want to go to a Korean church, a Korean speaking church. So how did your parents end up at Grace Community?
So it's an interesting story. My parents came in 1963. My father had just gotten married, and my father was going to go to grad school, and he went to UCLA for grad school.
Wow.
Now they were both unbelievers. So I think like many typical Koreans at the time, they went to a Korean church because that was the only place where they could see other Koreans. And I remember we bounced around different churches. We went to the Korean United Methodist Church in downtown LA. And but it was just mainly for social reasons. The only thing I remember about that church was that we had donuts every Sunday.
Yeah, so, fruit punch.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, I'm excited to go to church. And then we went to Full Gospel LA Church for a while. And during that time was when my mom got saved. And she went through quite a difficult season with, the typical mother-in-law, daughter-in-law sort of situation. And I told her I would share some of these things. It broke her. And, but I think that's what drove her to Christ. And so when we were attending the Full Gospel Church, my mother was starting to grow, but that's when the senior pastor asked my dad to become an elder. And my mom said, he's not a Christian. And the pastor said, well, maybe it'll help him to become one. So we ended up leaving that church.
Yeah.
Then we went to, my mom dropped us off at a Baptist Sunday school for a couple of years. And that's where I learned a lot of Bible. Went to a retreat where I got saved.
What age was that?
That was 8th grade.
Okay.
And then at that point, she said, I found a church. And it was very interesting. She didn't speak much English at the time, but she knew enough where she went to Grace Church and heard John MacArthur speak. And she said, this guy teaches the Bible.
Yeah.
And so she said, this is the church we're going to. So starting my 9th grade year, we started going to Grace Church. And my mom essentially learned English and the Bible going to Grace Church.
Wow.
And my dad was not saved at the time, but he later became saved my senior year in high school. And both of them, I think they had enough experience in the Korean church where they just did not see, I guess, the integrity issue, but also a commitment to preaching the word, which, obviously Grace Church is known for. So they went there since 78. And my mom still attends there to this day.
Is she still singing on the choir? I remember you told me that a long time ago. She was singing on the choir.
Well, she actually doesn't sing in the choir. She was part of something called Every Korean Women's Grace.
Okay.
So it was an extension of what they call Every Women's Grace. But there was an outreach specifically for Korean women where they just had to come in to study the scriptures. So people were actually coming from different churches to attend this midweek Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
And she did that for, I think, almost 30 years.
Did they feel uncomfortable at all going there? Because again, early 80s, you don't see a lot of Asians at like white churches, especially not knowing English too. That's pretty wild.
You know, it's funny. My mom being very Korean still, she wanted to honor the pastor. So I don't know how she found out, but she found out where John MacArthur lived. And every Christmas and their birthdays, she would go to the Korean market and get, big boxes of fruit, like a good Korean, right?
Yeah.
And so they were introduced to things like Asian pears and Fuji apples, and they had never seen this before.
Uh-huh.
And so even though there were hardly any Asians at the time, I think my parents really just loved being there. They loved the opportunity to learn scripture, and they just started building relationships with people. And so I think when I was growing up there, my parents did the very typical thing. They would invite the pastor to dinner. So we had him at our house. We go to a Korean restaurant. We met different elders and different folks at the church. People were just very welcoming. So I loved it, even though I recognized that there weren't too many Asians, but at that time I was sort of in an anti-Asian mode anyway. So, and the fact that my parents were very, very faithful, not only attending, but being involved and serving, that was such a huge example to me that they weren't going to let maybe those limitations, keep them from really making the most of the opportunity.
Unpack that a little bit. Why were you anti-Asian? Where did that come from?
Well, I grew up in K-Town initially, moved to the San Fernando Valley, and this was during a time where there weren't too many Koreans, right? So this is the 70s. And, people would make fun of me. They're like, hey, you chink. And I'm like, that's actually Chinese people you're talking about. If you want to get your racial, derogatory terms right, I'm technically a gook.
Yeah, you
right?
corrected them in their racism against you. You were teaching them the better racist word to use. Okay,
but I would get physically attacked. I get beat up. It was pretty miserable. And being the typical Asian, I never told my parents, so they never knew anything that was going on. So I just hated being Asian because I didn't understand. I was like, why are people making fun of me? Why are people beating me up? So that's really what contributed to me being anti-Asian.
It's really funny because Ben, in the podcast, we talked a little bit about that. There's a story that he talks about where people would make fun of him. And he was also kind of similar with you. Like, he didn't really grow up with a lot of like Asian friends like that. And he would be like, I don't get what you're making fun of me about, because they were making fun of him for being Asian. That's a very wild story that you guys both share that. So you grew up at Grace Community. You're at UCA. You go to Grace on campus. Were you part of CCM when that was starting out with Ben and Steve?
Right. So I came in the second year. And that was because my sophomore year at UCLA, I was invited by a friend from Grace Church to go to this Christian fraternity rush event. And I thought, what in the world? Like, how can there be such a thing as a Christian fraternity? So I go and I walk up the steps of Alpha Gamma Omega, and the first person I meet is Ben Shin. And to me, he looks like really Korean, right? And so,
he's a wise man.
So he looks at me, and the first thing he says, I remember, he goes, "Are you Korean?" And I was like, "Yeah." But again, I was very anti-Korean and all that. So, but because of him, so I eventually rushed the fraternity. And as a pledge, one of the things that they made me do was go to the Bible study. And if you know what being a pledge at a fraternity is about. You know, you got to wear this pin 24 hours a day, and then you have a little book, and they'll give you points or take away points. And so they literally told me, you have to go to the Bible study or we're going to take away points. And I thought that is terrible. So I go to, it was known as KCF at the time, Korean American Christian Fellowship, actually Korean Christian Fellowship, and they added the American a little later. Went to this Bible study. There must have been about like 5 guys and 20 gals. And it was probably like, you know, I'm used to Grace Church. I mean, I'm used to things being very different, very loud and very exciting. This group was not very exciting. The singing was sort of, And I just remember I didn't have the highest opinion of it. But then my last week of that fall quarter, I got asked to lead the singing because Ben couldn't be there for some reason. And so I remember leading the singing, and I thought, wow, these people don't know how to sing. But then during that break, Ben approached me and said, hey, to the older guys, they're graduating this year. We're looking for, you know, we need some new leaders. So would you consider being a part of this? And I thought, are you kidding? You know, and I've only been twice. Why would you ask me to join after only going? You got to be really desperate. But then I think providentially God just allowed certain circumstances, or I stepped off a junior high staff because of my father. He wanted me to focus on my studies, and then being part of the fraternity. So I ended up accepting that offer to join the core leadership team. But what I'm really grateful for is at the same time, they extended an invitation to my wife, Angela. And so we came on at the same time, and we just became good friends. And eventually she became my wife. So for that, I tell Ben, you know, thank you. Thank you. But yeah, being introduced to KCF really did change my whole outlook on life. Because that was the first time I think I really was able to connect with people who were in a similar place like me. You know, growing up here as kind of the front end of the second generation, and realizing, wow, there are other Koreans that speak English. I didn't know any others. All I heard were my parents or that generation, you know, speaking in broken English. And so it was an amazing time.
Unpack that for me a little bit, because you're attending KCF now. You're introduced to other Korean Americans like you, and you grew up with like this anti-Asian perspective. And so that probably was a big decision for you. Like, this was a church, Grace on campus. Why would I go here? You start going there, and it sounds like you started to really understand Korean culture better, or maybe some more of a Koreanness. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but unpack that for me a little bit. How did you start to process that and start getting used to Korean Americans?
I was still involved at Grace Church. I still attended, and I loved it. But I think, yeah, for the first time being with other Korean Americans, it was eye-opening. And I had never had any friends. My cousins, other than my cousins, they were the only other Korean Americans I really knew. So developing friendships and getting to know people, I think that first year really helped me to understand, oh, wow, there are other people like me. You know, I just didn't know. I just kind of assumed they were all straight from Korea. In fact, I remember my freshman year, I saw a flyer that said, "Are you an English-speaking Korean?" And it was the flyer for KCF. And my first thought was, no way, they're just a bunch of FOBs. I would never go to that Bible study. And, but God, you know, providentially kind of led me to that. And I think spending time, especially my second quarter at AGO, I moved in with Steve Chang, Ben Shin, and Burton Lee. So this is the first time we had like this Korean room. And I think Ben shared about this too. You know, just being together and then serving together on at the campus ministry just really entwined our lives. And I think getting to understand other people's background, their stories, and realizing, there are a lot of similarities here, dealing with the challenges of being part of two cultures, dealing with family issues and struggles. It was just such I think it broke down a lot of the walls that I had built up, and to realize, part of my anti-Asianness was because of how other people had treated me, but I'd never had any other Asians really to be with either. So, from that point on, I think God really allowed me to see that, wow, that there's an opportunity here to share all the things that I've learned. And at that time, I was not planning to go into ministry or anything. It was just, I have a chance to share. And so I ended up bringing a lot of the pastors from Grace Church and from the seminary to speak for our Bible study. And so it was kind of trying to sort of mesh the two worlds together in a sense. But yeah, I think God really used KACF to sharpen the direction of where eventually I would end up in ministry.
So that's interesting. You said that at that time, you weren't thinking about a pastoral ministry yet. So what were you planning on doing? What were you studying at UCLA? What did you think your direction was?
Well, like any other good Korean American, my dad wanted me to become a doctor, and that's all I heard growing up. The fact that I got into UCLA was a disappointment to him. He really wanted me to go to an Ivy League school.
Oh, okay, right.
And, I really didn't want to. I didn't want to go to the East Coast. And, I didn't have the grades anyway, so it didn't work out. But, I think growing up at Grace Church, I was just blessed to learn so much. So when I went to KCF, and like I said, I was just sharing the things that I was learning. We actually, as a core team, would teach once a quarter, and we would just go through a Bible book of the Bible. Oh,
this was the campus ministry?
Yes.
Oh, you didn't have like guest speakers coming in, kind of like what we did? Oh,
we did, but each of the guys on the core team would speak every quarter.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we just picked a book of the Bible, and we would go through it together.
Wow.
So I remember thinking, who are we? We're just,
yeah, that must have been very nerve-wracking.
Untrained, nobodies, but just spending the time to study the scriptures to then share. But after my first year, I made a lot of friends who were going to Korean churches. So they asked me to come and speak for their youth retreat.
While you're in college?
Well, because they heard I had served at
junior high
Grace
staff.
Church as junior high staff. Yeah. So I said, no, that was just as a volunteer.
Yeah.
But they're like, but you're teaching here at the Bible study. You speak English. Yeah. Can you come? So that summer after my sophomore year, I spoke for 6 retreats in a row, 6 weeks, 6 retreats.
Oh my gosh.
And my dad in the middle of one of them called me, and he told me to come home, and he was very, very upset with me. He said, you need to stop doing all this ministry. You need to quit everything. And I told my dad, I'm actually right in the middle of one right now. It was a VBS for a church. And so they said, we'll talk later. 2 weeks later, he calls me and says, come home again. He said, okay, forget everything I said. If you want to go into ministry, I'll support you.
Wait, was he a believer at this time?
Yes, but he was a young believer.
Yeah.
So I think that's why there was that initial struggle.
Where did that flip come from? Wow, that seems like a drastic change.
It was God, because he went from one extreme where he told me you need to quit everything, to then this other extreme where he said, not only will I support you go to seminary, he said, I'll go to seminary with you.
What?
And I thought, why would you do that?
Yeah.
My dad was a CPA, full-time CPA. The funny story is he ended up going to seminary later. I ended up teaching at APU for almost 20 years as a Greek professor.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know this.
He went to master's seminary for a while, studying under Dr. Robert Thomas, who was the Greek prof there.
Yes, awesome.
So it was his dream to become a Greek professor. So he did. Actually, when he came from Korea, his dream was to become an English literature professor. It was funny. Growing up, he spoke with this British accent. So he sounded formal all the time. But after God saved him, and his testimony is just an amazing story, but he still was a full-time CPA, but he ended up being a teacher at APU for Greek. But going back to that summer, so I was like, okay, I can change majors now. I was pre-bio, pre-med, switched my major to psychology because I thought that's the easiest major to retain as much as I could, but to get out.
Yeah.
And so after that summer of my sophomore year, now the other thing I found out after, my mom told me she had been praying for me for years to become a pastor, but she never told me that.
Wow, that's amazing.
So when I started seminary, I realized that this was not just something that just kind of chose to do.
Yeah.
My mom had been praying, and then my dad became this incredible support. And so I couldn't wait to get out of UCLA and then get to seminary.
Yeah. That is such an awesome testimony. I did not know that. I did not know your dad. So he started at master's. Where did he finish at? You said he started there.
So what happened was he was asked to become a translator for classes at APU for Korean students. These are from Korea. So he would translate for the professors. And they finally told him, why didn't you just get your master's and your doctorate while you're here? You'll get a discount, I guess, for, being on staff. So he had taken classes at master's for a while. He ended up getting his M.Div and his D.Min at APU. And the funny thing was, APU is not, I would say, in line with masters theologically,
right? For sure,
philosophically,
for sure.
But some of these professors just loved my dad, so they supported him. As my dad would, he told me stories. He would make the MacArthur Study Bible a required textbook. So he'd have me go and get boxes, and I just thought that was hilarious because they're like, how are they okay with this?
Yes,
right?
Yes.
But they loved him. They loved his heart for people. And because he supported them so much, he only stopped because someone petitioned to get rid of the original languages, and they finally got rid of them.
Oh, man.
And so he no longer had a position, which was really sad.
Yeah. So you get this call for pastoral ministry. And I always forget about this kind of trio with you, Ben, and Steve Chang. So you guys are all there together.
Mm-hmm.
But all three of you went to different seminaries. You went to Masters, Ben went to Talbot, Steve went to DTS.
Yes.
He moves out to go to Texas. Was that hard because you guys started together? And I would think, because I asked Ben the same thing, I would think you would go to Masters with John and stuff like that. So was that tough kind of going all to three different seminaries?
I don't know if it's so much tough. I think when I look back at my college years, the three of us were very different personalities too. Steve was kind of like the godfather. He was like the oldest. I was the youngest. So he and I actually clashed a lot because I was like, he was very conservative, like just in everything. And I was like the young guy who was pushing back on stuff. And so there are so many times we get into these, I call them debates, but, so I think for me, it wasn't so much that we needed to be all at the same place. I remember Ben, we went to Grace Church together. So, but Ben's path went a little differently than my path. And, I think looking back, I think that was actually something that was a good thing. It broadened our perspectives. There were challenges, of course, in trying to understand sometimes the differences. But, over the years, we were still able to maintain friendship. So I'm really thankful.
At the time when you went to Masters, was it called Talbot East or was it already called Masters by that time?
No. So in 86, what had been Talbot West, they officially started the seminary. And so a number of the Talbot profs ended up, going to Masters. And so I started in 88. So it was about 2 years in.
Okay. So you're at Master's Seminary. Were you attending school with Rick Holland at the time? I think you guys are close friends, right?
Yes. We were in registration. He was right in front of me. So that's why I remember him, and very friendly. He turns around and introduces himself. So we went to seminary together. We talked a lot during those years, and then we've kept in touch ever since.
I love Rick Holland. When I used to go to Shepherd's like every year, I went there for like almost 11 or 12 years, Shepherd's Conference. I always went to Rick Holland seminars. I loved that guy. And so that's awesome. So you guys went to school together. I think that's wild. And so you're going to Master's Seminary. While you're at Master's, though, you got into pastoral ministry. What church were you serving at that time?
So what happened was, while I was the intern at Grace Church for the junior high ministry, I was actually asked by a pastor of a small Korean church in Panorama City called Valley Korean Community Church to help out with their youth. Now, I'm still in my 5th year at UCLA. So I'm thinking, well, and I'm serving on staff at Grace Church, but this was in the afternoons on Sunday that they asked. So I asked my pastor, and he said that would be fine. So I started in November of 1987 with this small little youth group of about 10 kids, and I would go every Sunday afternoon. And after a year, the youth ministry leadership changed. And so they told me I could no longer do that. So I'd have to choose between Grace Church and this Korean church. And the director of the youth ministries at that time, he said something that kind of rankled me a bit. He said, why would you go to this small, dinky little Korean church when you could be at Grace Church? Now, believe me, I loved Grace Church, and I thought this was my dream to be there. But I guess I didn't appreciate that sort of attitude. So after praying, seeking counsel, now nobody counseled me to go to the Korean church. Of course, my parents and Angela at the time, who I was dating, or were we engaged at the time, maybe. We weren't married yet, but everyone else is like, why would you leave Grace Church? But I think at that point, I really just looked and saw everything I'd learned. Here's a place where they have a need, and there aren't too many people who can fill this need. So I ended up deciding to leave Grace Church and go to that Korean church. And that forever changed the course of my ministry.
Were they upset at Grace that you left?
No, there's so many people there that, you leave, people come in real quick.
Right.
I still love Grace Church. I've kept in touch with folks over the years. Various people who, when I would go to Shepherd's, they would remember me when I was in junior high.
Wow.
But I have no regrets making that decision, because I think after I left Grace Church and then started focusing in the Korean American church scene, God provided so many opportunities.
So what year was that when you left Grace and you started the youth ministry over at the Korean church?
So I was 87.
Okay. Wow.
And I recruited some people, some friends from UCLA to join as staff. And I just took what I had experienced at Grace Church and just basically shared it. So we'd have Sunday school, we'd have Friday night Bible studies, we'd have activities. And I think there weren't too many churches at the time that had someone who spoke in English, like for real. And so in this small church, the senior pastor, his name was Kevin Shim. He's in heaven now. Probably the most gracious first generation pastor that I had ever met. And he just basically supported me in everything I did. To a fault. And so I was given just almost like a free rein to explore just expanding, ministry opportunities, started doing things like having parent youth nights where we'd have open discussions. And some of them were disastrous because, kids would say stuff and the parents get mad and then, I get in trouble. And, but the senior pastor was so supportive. And so I think God was gracious just to provide this opportunity to, I was young. I was 22 at the time. So, looking back now, I just think, wow, God was really gracious, but being very, I guess I would say I'm sort of a risk taker. I love to be adventurous. So this was like just, it was my favorite place kind of to be in a sense where I could just try ideas and, those are some wonderful days.
You said that the senior pastor was gracious and that he let you kind of explore. I find that very odd because that's not typically what we hear about normal KM senior pastors. And the fact that you went to a Korean church to serve in ministry, coming from how you were raised and all the stuff that you experienced, I would think and assume that it would have been really hard because now you're dealing with KM ministry and things like that. So I think that's great that you met the senior pastor who was so helpful for you. How long were you there at that church for?
I was there for almost 6 years. And starting from that youth group, we started a college ministry, a young adults ministry. People started getting married, so we started a marrieds ministry. And then we started the EM, I think about 2 years in.
And you were the EM pastor?
Yeah.
Okay.
So having the senior pastor be so supportive, and, this was somewhat kind of novel for, I think a lot of folks. So we were drawing people. We had people come from Orange County. It was crazy. We're in Sylmar at the time, which is on the north end of the valley.
Yeah, seriously.
There's like nothing out there.
Wow.
But it was just, those were just crazy days because we're running 100 miles an hour. I'm going to seminary. I'm working 3 jobs. And so life is crazy. But, God provided so much opportunity. People are getting saved. And it was a very young group, but within a year or so, we had outnumbered the KM side, like almost 2-1.
The EM outnumbered them.
Yeah, because we had so many people come in. It was wild.
Yeah.
But there was an elder. There was only one other elder other than the pastor. He made my life miserable. So
talk about that. Yeah. Why was it so hard? As much as the
senior pastor was supportive. Well, I think it was 3 months in, he asked me to go out to dinner with my advisor. So, wow, that's nice. And we go to this Korean Chinese restaurant in K-Town. And he takes out a piece of paper and he said, there are 40 things that you have done wrong. And, I was kind of stunned. I thought this was going to be a nice dinner. And so I remember I couldn't even eat. I didn't eat that night. And he went through this list and, there were things I just couldn't understand. Now, I didn't know all the Korean cultural rules. So in that respect, I could understand why he was not happy with me. But there are situations that would come up. For instance, we had Korean school right after the youth group on Sundays. So I would see kids doing their Korean school homework during youth group. So I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, well, we have homework. So I asked this elder one day, I said, could we move Korean school to Saturdays? I go, I'm all for Korean school. That's fine. I went to Korean school. I think it's great. But Sunday should be for spiritual things. And they're doing their homework. And he was like, why would we ask parents to drive all the way to church on another day? Now, this is part of my youthfulness. And I was a bit rash. I said, what good is it for these kids to learn Korean and go to hell? Now, I got in trouble.
That's a good line. Yeah.
Well, what happened was this elder, he had 3 kids, 2 of them in a youth group. They eventually left the church. They came back after a year and he meets up with me and he said, I got saved.
The kids?
No, the elder.
Oh, the elder.
So that time before, he wasn't even a believer.
He's not a Christian.
Yeah, he's not even a believer. So, and he became this sweet man. And so when I was going to go through ordination through the Korean Presbytery, the KPC, they made me go to a Korean seminary because I went to master's, so they didn't count that. So I actually went to seminary with him for a year, and he became a pastor, started a church eventually, and he's retired now. But sweet man. But it was such a contrast from before. And so I was like, oh, that's why he was like that. He wasn't even a Christian.
Wait, the senior pastor didn't know? He didn't know that he was a non-believer?
So, I think it's one of the mysteries I still quite don't understand. I mean, biblically speaking, you understand, that's just not right.
Right.
But I think in a lot of Korean churches, like the one that the pastor asked my dad to become an elder, and I thought, that's crazy. Why would? But for whatever reason, those things happen. And, but now I look and see, having pastored for, it's like 35 years now, the second generation is not, they have similar issues in a sense. It's just because you don't always know. You don't always know where people are at.
Right.
And so people could say all the right things, and they could even look like they're a leader. And so you might appoint someone to be an elder or a deacon or so forth. And so I don't understand why someone like that would have, become an elder. But, like hearing Ben's story and other people's stories, and you hear that, I mean, they're elders in name, but, they do terrible things. So why are they there? Well, I think God uses those situations for his good purposes, despite what would seem to be so contradictory in a sense. But as a pastor now, all I know is, well, as much as I'm able to, we need to make sure we do our due diligence in training up those who are going to be the elders and the leaders of the church, and do everything at least on your part. But I found leaving the first generation, KM church scene, you think that there would have been maybe less problems. No, there are so many challenges that I faced, especially in church planting. So even though I thought, we might not have those same exact issues, you're going to still face challenges in leadership. So, but I look back now and I think, well, God was just kind to have me learn through difficult situations, and to stretch me through all that, and to help broaden my perspective. I think I look back now with a lot more of a gracious mentality. I used to be a lot more upset with kind of how the Korean churches worked.
All of us. You were a part of a very unique time period where you were part of that first wave of English ministry, English-speaking Korean pastors. I think it's wild what you shared before about college campus ministry, where the way they promoted it was, are you Korean? You speak English. That's why I'm going to use that for illustration so many times now. I cannot believe that. So, wow, we've come a long way. So you're part of this first wave. Pastor James Hahn talks about this kind of godfathers of the valley. He named you, Jimmy Hahn, a guy named John Coe. I don't know who that is. And I think he named one more. I think he was named James Lee. I forgot. But here you are. There's not a lot of you guys out there. It was a very small group. There were no previous EM pastors. This is just getting birthed. What was that like? How did you kind of form the ministry? Were you talking to the rest of the guys? What was your emotional makeup like birthing an English-speaking congregation in a Korean church?
Well, I think for me, I wasn't so maybe concerned with, I think one of the benefits I had was that in terms of mentoring or just being discipled, I had folks at Grace Church and Chris Mueller, who was my junior high and college pastor. He was probably the person I would just go to all the time, and I would cry on his shoulders. And then another guy named Irv Busenitz, who used to be the dean at the Seminary and was an elder at Grace Church as well. And between those two men, they were always available for me. So I think at least I had that end covered. But in terms of seeing, the opportunities, we just ran with it. One of the things we would do is we'd have these summer conferences where all these other youth pastors would get together. So that's where I met like Jimmy Hahn and James Hahn and Scooter. And I look back now, and when I was watching their podcast, I was like, wow, that was a long time ago. We would talk here and there, and I think, we were sort of spread out a bit, but I think I was so busy just with developing things. I didn't think too much of its significance, I guess you could say, in a historic sense. But looking back now, I realized like, oh, wow, that was kind of like the start of this whole EM sort of movement in the Korean American church. And, believe it or not, I used to have a lot more energy. Now I don't. But I think I was just so go at the time. It was just 24/7. We were, I was part-time for the first, actually almost the whole time I was at that church.
Even as the EM pastor?
Yeah. Wow. I had to get support from a foundation. I worked part-time jobs.
Wait, but the EM got bigger than the KM. They still didn't hire you full-time?
Well, all the budgeting decisions were still by the KM. All right. So, and I look back now and I think, they were still trying to figure out how to do all this.
Right.
So they didn't take really good care of me, but I was like, well, okay, whatever. I'm just going to keep doing what I do. So I started off with $200 a month as a youth pastor. Got married. They bumped me up to $500.
$500.
Yeah.
You're married, you get $500 now.
In fact, I didn't get health insurance from the church until a month before I left. So in 6 years, I had to get that pay for it myself. So yeah, those are challenging things. But I think we were just so excited about ministry and just excited for the opportunities. So it was just day to day, week to week. What can we do to serve the Lord, to see the gospel spread and to disciple these folks? Because like I said, it kind of started to really grow. And I was like, what do we do with all this? And, just being young myself, had to go through a lot of, I think, learning experiences, making mistakes. But those are just exciting days, So I think seeing the other guys now, especially as we look back, God was working in different places. And we were just the ones that God was gracious to let us be a part of all that.
So you're there for 6 years. And after that, is that when you went to Lighthouse down in San Diego?
No. So I went to Maryland for almost 5 years.
Oh.
And so my wife's college pastor at Youngnuck, he went to Maryland a few years before. And the church that he was at, they went through some challenges. So he ended up planting a church in Columbia, Maryland. And he calls me one day, and I knew him a little bit. He said, hey, would you come out to Maryland and help me start an EM? And in 3 years, we'll launch you to be an independent church.
Wow.
So I was like, wow. Now I had a great thing going at the church in, Silmar. But we had gone through some leadership challenges earlier that year, and it really broke me.
In the EM or in the KM?
In the EM.
Okay.
And I think for the first time, I had very boldly said, I'm going to live and die in LA. And then I was praying, I realized, God, maybe I've been so just focused on what I thought my plans would be. I want to be open to whatever you would want me to do. I want to go wherever you want me to go. I don't want to be so, I guess you could say, in control of my own life to the point where I'm not willing to consider what you would want me to do. So it was a few months after I prayed that this call came in, and I went out. Usually if someone called me asking me if I'd consider, I would say no immediately. I was not interested. But this time I said I would pray, and he used a line on me that really challenged me. He said, his motto in life was faith is an adventure. And he said, if you don't move out here, you can't say that. Now, I thought, okay, that's kind of messed up to just say it like that. But it did make me think, what does it mean to live by faith? You go to Hebrews 11 and you see, the Old Testament characters like Abraham, he leaves his home to go to a place he's never seen. And so after going back and forth quite a while, took my wife out there. We prayed about it. And we were having a picnic with our church. And I remember for the first time, I didn't lead the games. I always led the games for the church with KMEM together. Went to the top of a little hill and I looked over and I realized, you know what? I am not indispensable. And I could just be dead for all I can't, things will go on. So I'm not so important in that sense. And so that was the day I decided we'll go to Maryland. And we had one daughter at the time. She was just a year and a half. And I knew nothing about Maryland other than it was one of the original 13 colonies. And when I went there, they were really trying to win me over. And they're really big on seafood, right? Like Maryland blue crab and oysters and all this. And I hate seafood.
You hate seafood.
And I was like, I am leaving In-N-Out. I am leaving Tommy's. Okay, I love burgers. I'm leaving all the things that I grew up with in LA to a place I've never known. But, God was so good. We moved over there in the summer of 1993 and stayed there for about almost a little over 4.5 years. First few years are great. And the last couple of years were horrible. And I think that's where I had some real live experiences of kind of like, these horror stories you hear about. They became my reality for the last 2 years I was there. So I left there very broken and very bitter. In fact, I hated Koreans after that. Literally, I did. And I vowed I'd never be a pastor again.
Wow.
I didn't want to go to church anymore. And it was a pretty brutal time.
Was that church a KMEM church or just more? Okay, so it was a KMEM church.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that were so difficult that broke you like that in those last couple of years?
I think, it was just being maybe sometimes stunned at how things happen. So they promised so much for me to go out there. So they're like, sell your home, sell your car. We'll get you a new car. So I was like, I don't know, sounds too good to be true. One of the leaders of the church who was a very wealthy man, one day he picks me up in his Mercedes and he goes, oh, we got a new car for you. So I was all excited. Takes me to this mechanic and it's a 15-passenger van that had been donated by the Korean School of Baltimore. It looked like it got beat up with a bat. And then I look inside, there's cigarette butts, there's beer cans in there. I thought he was kidding. And he goes, well, we had to fix it up a little bit, but this is your new car.
Oh, no.
And so it dawned on me, I'm now the driver for church events. And I was like, okay, well, just got to make the best of it. And so that's what I would pick up the youth kids in. It broke down every 2 weeks. I got stranded on the freeway. I finally convinced them to sell it so that I could just get a regular car. But that was kind of like the beginning. And then when we were moving towards the church planting launch, that's where the kind of the politics, I think, I started to realize. I went and gave a proposal one night, and this was in front of the KM leaders. One guy got up and just started yelling at me. He's like, who do you think you are? You just want our money. And he was just saying stuff. And what was crazy was he was my neighbor. I played tennis with him. His daughter babysat for us. He was a really nice man. But he's maybe like 10 feet away from me screaming. And I thought, first of all, you don't have to scream. I'm like 10 feet away. But now he's slandering me in front of all the leaders. And I remember looking at the senior pastor and I was like, and he was just like, I look at my advisor. He's just kind of head down. And no one would support me. And I remember he went on for 15, 20 minutes just yelling at me and accusing me of things. And I was praying to God, keep me from going up. I just want to slug him. I mean, he is humiliating me in front of all the church leaders. God was gracious. I went up to him afterwards and I said, thank you for your concerns. I'll consider them. And he just kind of stared at me. And I went back home, and my wife, who had been praying for me, said, so how'd it go? And I broke down, and I think I cried for about an hour. And that was the beginning of my health started to break down. And the senior pastor, he was a nice man, but I saw that he was a very pragmatic kind of man too. And so he was trying to, extend kind of like the KM agenda. But he was at the same time trying to convince me he supported the EM too. And, but it was just contradictory, just things that would happen, things that would be told to the KM versus the EM. So I finally decided, I just need to resign. And I was very desperate at that point. I think, I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I remember there were days where I would just pray, God, just take me. I don't want to live anymore.
Wow.
And so when we left, December 31st, 1997, we packed everything into our Honda Civic. We had 2 girls by then. And we left Maryland to drive across the country to San Diego to stay with my brother-in-law who was living there. And I remember rolling down the window. My wife was driving, and it was a cold, dreary day. And I just screamed. I just said, freedom!
Good old Braveheart.
Yeah. I literally said that. And, we drove to San Diego, and for about 3 months, I think I just was locked up in an upstairs bedroom. And I literally wore black and gray every day. And I just replayed all the things that happened in my mind. And I was like, God, I don't understand. Like, I left everything in LA to go there, and we lost everything. We sold our house at a loss. I said, the one thing we came out of Maryland was with another daughter. That's it. So, I just couldn't believe that I would get sort of left to just be hung out to dry like that. And so, I was just very, very angry and bitter for quite some time. But a year later, I flew out because the youth pastor was a good friend of mine, asked me to speak for their youth retreat.
And
they approved
back.
it. And I went back because maybe a few months before I left Maryland, I went to the seminar in Washington, D.C. by a guy named Ken Sandy, who wrote the book Peacemaker.
Yes.
And I remember 15 minutes in, I was like, every Korean needs to hear this because there's no peacemaking strategy,
Right.
So after I left and, after that year, I knew that I had to just seek reconciliation.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness.
I spoke for the retreat, and then I asked the senior pastor if we could meet, and we met. And I just said, I want to take responsibility for my part. I know I didn't handle everything well, and I was angry and bitter, and I want to confess that to you. I'll ask your forgiveness. And he was like, okay. And he didn't say anything, to reciprocate, but I was like, God, okay, I did my part to pursue peace. So, but since that time, he was kind to respond back and forth. We had some emails, and even when we supported when we planted the Lighthouse churches, he wrote some nice things to be supportive. So, in the end, we were reconciled, I guess you could say. And he's retired now. I think I look back and I know that he was in a difficult position too, because there were parents who put a lot of pressure on him too. They're like, why would you let this guy do this? But he had made these promises from way back in the beginning. So I think church politics will realize, wow, it's real. There are some people who will go out of their way to speak out. I was invited to preach once for the KM service, and I challenged them. I challenged them to be a generation that would pass on the greatness of God to the second generation, because I said that's not the case for a lot of churches. And I was told after that I should have been fired for saying that, but they were supportive enough to still keep me on.
Can I just say, what you just shared about going to the Ken Sandy seminar and then going to the senior pastor after that and reconciling with him, I got shivers. I couldn't, I can't believe that. That is amazing. The humility it takes to do that. I got like literally inside, I was like emotionally like getting filled up. That is so amazing. Just your act of humility. That must have been, I mean, just for you to go to speak at the retreat, I couldn't believe you would do that after coming back and you said like, hated Koreans, you didn't want to go back there. That is absolutely wild.
I think it was it was just God being sovereign in working in my life, like to go to that seminar. Like I didn't even know who this guy was. I just heard it interested me. And that really became something that has really been, I guess you could say, a hallmark of what I'm committed to in ministry, that we would be peacemakers. You know, Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called sons of God. So our identity really should reflect peacemaking. And it was just God being, I think, gracious to humble me through all that. And, later on, I was preaching through the book of Romans when I was in San Diego, and I hit chapter 9. And Paul talks about how he wishes, that he would be even willing to go to hell, be accursed for the sake of his, Jewish brothers and sisters. So I remember thinking about that and going, in my context, if I were to think, okay, my Korean brothers and sisters, especially the first generation, I don't know if I could say what Paul said. Paul saying he's willing to go to hell. I remember preaching this. I said, I would just say, go to hell. But then it struck me like Paul went through so much suffering at the hands of his own people. And yet he has this heart for them. And I really had to repent. Even though, I had kind of worked through some things, I realized that this bitterness I had, I used to tell people, I am racist against only one race, and that's Koreans. I look back now, I'm so ashamed, just that I was that arrogant to think more highly of myself in that way. And so after, I think God used all of that to really not only humble me, but to show me, if I look at the first generation and just want to blame them for things, how different am I than going to be for the next generation after me? And I'd like to think I'd be better. But I've learned now, especially over the course of church planting, that the second generation is not necessarily better. It just might come out in different ways. So, but that whole seminar was life-changing for me. And so we've made it now part of our membership process, to walk through the Peacemaker Pledge. We spent a lot of time with our membership class to walk through all those things and to say, if you're going to become a member, you are pledging to be a peacemaker, and you will not leave this church without pursuing peace. You could leave, but pursue peace. And so that's one of the things that I think the members at our Lighthouse churches understand now, that is a distinctive that maybe a lot of them had never, ever really heard emphasized.
Like what you shared about reading Romans 9 and that, like those scriptures is what spoke to you. Mm-hmm. I wish more people would go back to the word, and they're struggling with, like you, emotionally struggling, financially struggling. These past 2 years was madness, and they were looking for answers, and I felt like in all the wrong places. Yeah. And I wish, it sounds so cliche, but it's the right answer. Just go back to the Bible. Of course, you don't just flip anywhere. You really want to go to the right place, but we forget the authority of Scripture and how God speaks to us through the Scriptures. And I love that testimony of yours. You're reading Romans 9. I asked you that question, like, how did it was the Word of God. The Word of God changed your heart. And I love that. I love that testimony. When you came back from the Kinsan seminar, you go to this retreat, you reconcile. At that point, did you think, I'm never, ever doing Korean church, especially a KM church ever again? Did you think that? Did you think like, I'm only going to do English speaking, Korean Americans only, never going to work with KM?
Well, I think some of the realities that came out of that is one of them is that I realized maybe I wasn't the best equipped person. Like, I was born and raised in LA. I didn't speak Korean. I could understand, kind of conversational to a bit. I definitely understood bad words because I was called them growing up. But I think I didn't understand the culture. I didn't understand the language. So if you're going to be in a KM/EM situation, obviously it would be, to your benefit to be able to have good communication. And I think that was one of the challenges, even though we were able to talk somewhat, but just all the nuances, cultural nuances, I remember one time, my senior pastor at VKCC introduced me to a visiting pastor, an older man. So I just went like this. I just held up my hand and he just turned away from me. And in Korean, he was like, who does this guy think he is? Now, I understood what he was saying. And in my mind, I was, who does he think he is? I'm like, why is he treating me like that? Well, I didn't follow the Korean cultural rules. I didn't look down, I didn't bow, I didn't hold my arm. I didn't do all that stuff. I know now, but it's almost like missions. I think there's a challenge. Like, if you go to a different country, obviously you want to learn the language, you want to learn the culture. But then doing ministry here in an immigrant kind of, setting, I think people don't realize how there's still a lot of almost like that missions mentality that needs to be had. And it needs to go both ways too. But I think that's where the challenge has been. And then if you're not able to communicate well, if you're not willing to be understanding toward each other in terms of, just like the background, like, I just wish that there was more understanding. Like, I didn't know. I just didn't know. I watch Korean dramas now, so I'm like, oh, I understand some things better now. But my heart, I still really, like after I said, going through Romans 9, I think there's still such a need. I just don't know if I'm the best equipped person. And now I'm just kind of old.
Season. Come on, man.
But I love what you're doing and what you're wanting to do, because there is a need to be more proactive in addressing these issues instead of just reacting to all the problems, which has been going on, for decades now.
Even second gen right now, I think is very reactionary. Like a lot of people my age, we're parents now, and we experience a lot of stuff you experience, and we're raising our kids so differently, but the pendulum has swung so far the other way. It's all reactive because we were raised with our first gen immigrant parents. So much going on with second gen. I do want to get into that a little bit later. But first, you're now in San Diego. And is this when you joined Lighthouse here in San Diego?
So when we moved to San Diego that was 98, there was a group of people and they wanted to plant a church. And they approached me and asked me if I would be willing to pastor. And I was like, no. I'm not going to stick my neck out again and get my head chopped off. But they were very persistent. And so I said, okay, if you're willing to sign in blood that you're willing to do this, okay, I'll give it a shot. So we started, what really was the beginning point was the spring of 98. There were two other families. And we started meeting on Wednesday nights for dinner. And I had really missed Mexican food while I was in the East Coast. They only had Taco Bell. So San Diego being
great,
just wonderful.
So many good spots.
So I said, we're going to have Mexican food and we'll come together and pray. So I was actually more excited about the Mexican food.
Yeah.
And, but God used that time, I think, just to knit our hearts. And then there were other people who were interested in wanting to be a part of this. So the summer of 98, we started a Bible study, a Friday night Bible study. And we had about 15 people come. And so over the course of 6 months, more people came. And I walked through the gospel. We went through just a Bible survey. And so by December of 98, we had our first Sunday service and launched Lighthouse Bible Church San Diego.
How many people did you have in your core group at that time?
So we had about 30 people by then. And I look back now and, I was still working another full-time job. And there was a church in Texas. Pastor Eric Shin, his wife Lynette, was one of the founding members of KCF.
Right.
And so one of their, regional flocks decided to support us $200 a month.
Wow.
Which paid for our rent starting in that December of 98. So, it was just, I think I was very, very reluctant at that time. So I still had felt so burnt by what had happened. So I was very cautious. But for whatever reason, God brought just these wonderful people who helped to bring a lot of healing and a lot of love and support and encouragement. So when we started the church plant in San Diego, I said, okay, well, here's what I want you to understand. We call it the MVP. Our mission is to make disciples of Christ, Matthew 28, 18 and 20. Our vision is to plant churches, Acts 1:8. Just like, let's not just think about ourselves, let's think about spreading out. And that's the pattern of the book of Acts. So, and then the passion statement to love God and people, Matthew 22, 37 to 40. And then our distinctive will be the peacemaker pledge. So glorify God, get the log out of your own eye, gently restore, go and be reconciled. So I said, if we can really hold to a high view of God, a high view of His Word, just do this. We're not doing anything fancy. Okay, we're just going to just do this. So that was 1998, and God's been gracious since that point to allow us to plant churches and take us on a journey that I think my wife especially, I don't think we ever anticipated, but God has been so good.
Hey, real quick, thank you so much for watching. If you're finding value in this content, can you please support the channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, selecting all on the notification bell, or write a comment down below. All 4 of these things helps our channel get pushed out more on YouTube homepages so that more people can find this value. Okay, let's get back to the podcast. You start Lighthouse, and this is similar to Pastor Jameson, where you guys both do something that, again, in that time, there's not too many of you. Let's start our own church. Most of the Korean Americans back then were just EMs attached to KMs, things like that. So this is also very new during that time. There weren't too many Korean American church planters. I said this before. I think Korean church, even today, is still behind in church planting a little bit. We just want to stay close and stay together, right? It is happening more now, things like that. So when you're church planting, what were you doing? What was your strategy? Who were you talking to? Because again, there's not too many of you that are doing that, especially Korean Americans.
Right. I think I wanted to just keep things simple. I read a bunch of books on church planting. I sought counsel. I was like, I'm just going to go with what I've been brought up. Just preach the word, disciple people, share the gospel. And that's it. We don't have money. We don't have our own facilities. We're just going to have to really invest in relationships. And so that's all we did. And that's what I tried to really encourage our members to do. And what was interesting is we started off they were all Koreans. But soon it started to broaden, and other Asian Americans were starting to come to the point where it became predominantly Chinese American.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That was very, very interesting. As well as, other Asians. And we never said that we were a distinct Korean American church. And I think this is one of the challenges that, even internally we had to work through. Is my approach was, there's a need within the Korean American community for solid Bible teaching churches, but also within the greater Asian American community. Now, we're going to welcome anyone who comes in. So if you're not Asian, that's fine. We're not going to say you can't come. I think in an immigrant church situation, it was a little more difficult at times just because the KM side would wonder, why are these white people here?
Yeah, they're lost.
Yeah. And I could understand why that's a challenge. But now, given that, especially with, my daughters are third generation. My second daughter married someone from the Czech Republic. So, things have changed a lot in terms of just how even the third generation just looks at life and so forth. And so my girls are so not Korean.
Do they speak Korean?
No.
Okay.
When they try, at a restaurant, they sound like
like white people.
White people trying to order, right? Just watching how God worked, it was amazing. I remember we were starting to do an outreach at the Marine base in Miramar, and there were no Asians there. They're all just Caucasian guys that came. God saved them, and they became just this vital part of our church life. And they were so much fun, to hang out with. We had a young adults Bible study. We called it Happy Hour. So that's why one of them came, because his friend told him,
thought it was Happy Hour.
You want to go to Happy Hour? And he was like, yeah. And he comes to the Bible study and he was like, what in the world? How is that? He was not a believer, but I ended up talking to him. He just had a great personality. He was just very, very engaging. God saved him. And I could tell you so many testimonies, stories of people. God was just so kind to bring them to our church. And, baptisms were probably the biggest highlight of the year, just to see people give testimony as to God saving them. So, nothing fancy. I was just, I guess you could almost say, like a spectator watching God just do incredible things.
The Lighthouse grew. It became a very, very strong church. I remember when I used to be on KCM staff, I used to be the campus staff at UC San Diego. Mm-hmm. There were only two churches that our people went to at San Diego. It was either Hope Church or Lighthouse. That's where everyone came. I know some people too, back in that day, former college student who now is a pastor at Berean, Nate Kwok, Nathaniel Kwok. I just talked to someone yesterday actually also who said, I think he went to Lighthouse. His name is Curtis Yee. He does freelance journalism now. I just talked to him on the phone yesterday. So he says hi to you. Yeah. And so I know these students who went through Lighthouse, you're building Lighthouse Church, and then you finally get to fulfill your church planting vision.
Yes.
And I think it was at this point, is this when you went to NorCal to start the first Lighthouse over there? How did you get to that point, especially moving again? That's a huge thing. I hate moving, by the way. I hate moving. I don't want to move. I hate packing. But to move again from something that was very good, like you said, from your Valley Church, it's comfortable. You're doing great things. I think your brother or brother-in-law was there at the same church.
Brother-in-law.
You have a very strong group. How did you get moved to go all the way to NorCal to plant Lighthouse?
I think at every church I've been, there has been like a significant trial that really broke me. And so that happened in San Diego too, with a leadership situation. And it almost like put me out. My health broke down. And so I had to take a leave of absence. And as we were approaching our 10-year anniversary as a church, so during that time, I think I just had some time to pray and to recover, but also think of the future. And I thought, people have been saying, well, the vision is supposed to plant churches, right? And we haven't planted any churches. So when are we going to do that? And I thought, well, maybe God has allowed me to go through some of these hardships to prepare me for further hardships. And so the initial plan was to send my associate. And so I actually told him, you need to pray and prepare to be sent out.
Who is that at the time?
Patrick Cho.
Oh, yeah.
Who's the senior pastor now.
Yeah.
And so he was like, okay, I'll do that. And I went to San Jose to speak at a conference, and I met some pastors. And they were so discouraged and just... one guy was just crying, and I just thought, wow, this must be a really hard place to do ministry, San Jose. And so on the way back down, so this was right over New Year's of 2008 to 2009. And some of our college students who came from San Jose, we got together for New Year's up there while I was there. And so the first thing they said was, Pastor John, can you plant a church here in San Jose? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't thought of any particular place. I just know that we want to do it. So on the drive down with my family, with Angela and my 4 girls, we stopped at a Jack in the Box off the 5 freeway. And I said, okay, family meeting. I want to ask all of you a question. I need you to give me your honest answer. I'm thinking that we should plant a church in San Jose. And I'm thinking our family should be part of the team to go. What do you think? And my wife, Angela, who has been really the rock in our family. And, she has always said, as long as you're following Christ, I'll follow you wherever you go. I hate moving too. We've moved 33 times in 33 years. And I think what that's taught me is to not hold on to anything. I hate moving. We moved a year ago, and but I was bedridden, so I couldn't do much at the time. But my wife, she's just been so faithful in that way. Just to say, she is the one who wants stability. She is the one who's into planning and details and all that. But she learned early on, being with me meant that you're going to have to live by faith. My oldest daughter at the time, she was a junior in high school. So I said, are you willing to forego your senior year, move and go to a different school? Oh my
goodness, yeah.
She was like, yeah. Wow. My second daughter is like, she really followed my oldest daughter. So she's like, yeah, I'm willing to do that too.
And what grade was she in at that time?
She was 8th grade. Yeah. So she was in 8th grade she was going to go into high school the following year. And then my third daughter, all her cousins are in San Diego. So that was the only thing that she was a little sad about. But she's like, can I take my cousin Kayla? I was like, well, I don't know if Uncle John and Auntie Grace would appreciate it, but she can visit anytime. So she was in elementary at the time. So she's like, okay, I'm fine. My youngest, Olivia, she was only 4 at the time. We had just come from San Jose. So she was like, I love San Jose. So we made a decision. I brought it to the elders and I said, okay, I know that my original plan was to send Patrick, but I would like to propose that I would go and lead a team to plant a church in San Jose. So they were surprisingly very supportive. It was almost too easy. They're like, sounds great. And I'm like, okay, I expected a big debate over this. Yeah. We've debated every other thing. Why are you trying to get rid of me? Why are you trying to get rid of me? Yeah, that's what I thought. But they said, no, this fits you. And I kind of like the grassroots sort of setting of ministry. I'm not someone that likes to sit behind a desk. I'm not someone that likes to take care of details. I just want to be with the people, and so we announced it to the church and it was like we won the World Series or something. I mean, people just started screaming and cheering and so we took 1.5 years to prepare, and we had about 25 other people move up with us to San Jose to plant a church.
That's crazy. Wow. 25 people.
I was hoping for like 5.
Right. 25 people.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your daughter because I think that's wild because high school, that's an important time in life. That's all your friends. Her last year in high school, she has to spend in a new school. No friends, doesn't know anyone. The faith of your daughter to be expressed in a way where she says, I'm going to follow you. Let's go church plant. That's amazing. That is amazing. God's been so good. My daughters, like I said, they are so loving and supportive. Now they're all very, very different personalities. And so I've tried very hard to invest time with them. And because I know it's been hard being pastors' kids, moving around. And that's one of the challenges that, my wife and I look back and go, the one hard part about church planting is all the uprooting and changing of friends and so forth. And so, I look back at that time and, God was just gracious, even through all my kids. I spoke very openly about all the things that, I was considering. Not that they were the ones who were going to decide it, but I wanted them to make sure that they were still a part of it and that I would hear them out, just in terms of any concerns I had. I grew up with a
a very, Korean sort of setting where you don't ask questions. You just do what you're told kind of thing. Even when I came to college, I just said, I'm not going to tell you where to go. I said, if you even apply to USC, I'll be okay with that.
Hey, USC's the best. Yeah, I'm a Trojan, so come on, man. Come on.
I know. Well, they know. Well, my second daughter, she actually said, Dad, how could you?
Did your second daughter go to UCLA?
No.
Okay.
My 3 older daughters all went to Masters University.
Oh, they did. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So my oldest, we ended up leaving after she graduated from high school. So she didn't have to actually leave. Mm-hmm. But just hearing that she would be willing.
That's amazing.
Was really
unbelievable.
Yeah. I was just so grateful.
So you go to San Jose. Is it San Jose?
Yeah.
San Jose? Okay. You go there. How long were you there for? How many years?
I was there about 3 years.
You planted that church. And then you decide to leave again.
Yeah.
And this is when you planted the Glendale campus, right?
Initially in Pasadena.
Right. And then you guys moved to Glendale.
Yeah.
Why did you do that again, man? Why did you move again? What's going on here?
Well, when we moved up to San Jose, I had grown up as an LA guy. Mm-hmm. The only thing I knew about the Bay Area was the Giants, mm-hmm. the hated ones,
mm-hmm.
big Dodger fan. But when the Dodgers sold out to Fox Corporation, I actually was so upset about it. I got rid of all my Dodger gear.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, forget you, Dodgers. You've betrayed me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started going, we went to Maryland, we went to other places. We just would support the home team. And so I told the girls, there are 2 baseball teams up here. Because those are very important to me. We need to adopt sports teams.
Okay.
There's only one basketball team, the Warriors. So we'll support them, except when the Lakers play. And then there's only one hockey team, the San Jose Sharks, and that's easy. Football team, 49ers, Raiders. They hated the Raiders because we were San Diego Charger fans. Mm. But the biggest decision was Oakland A's versus San Francisco Giants. And my girls said they don't like green and yellow. So it purely came down to colors. And we loved being in NorCal. It was very different from SoCal.
Yeah, the culture is very different up there.
But the need, the spiritual need there, so intense. It's a very, very, it's driven by the whole, computer industry and all that kind of stuff up there. So a lot of single folks, a lot of crazy busy people who are struggling so much. And so God provided so many wonderful opportunities. So we loved it there. But then, one day I told my wife, we're almost getting to our 50s. What should be maybe kind of like that last season of ministry that I could focus on? And so given our commitment to plant churches, I thought, maybe I should move back to LA. I had vowed I'd never move back to LA at that point. Be close to the seminary so that I could work with seminarians and that our church could be kind of like a training grounds and a place where you can then hopefully train up future pastors as well as support the church planting process of Lighthouse to plant other churches and so forth. Because we had planted a church in East Bay near Berkeley in 2012. Sent out some people. That situation turned out bad. It shut down eventually, and there are some hard lessons with that. We replanted a church, Lighthouse OC, in 2014. And so it's been interesting, just different things that have been going on. So, my wife and I, we decided, okay, let's move back to LA. And that's what prompted us to then coordinate a joint effort with San Diego, Lighthouse San Diego. So they sent out about 30 people to move to LA to plant the church.
So the Anaheim one planted before you guys?
Yeah. So we helped assist the church plant there.
Okay.
And then they're still going on. This whole church planting thing has been kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. It hasn't followed any script necessarily. Each church plant has been a little different. So, but coming to LA, it was with the hopes that this would kind of propel us for the future. So that's why, moved to LA.
So you go to Pasadena, you're planting now this lighthouse over here. I don't know if you remember this, but before Saddleback, I was church planting for 2 years.
Right.
It was the toughest 2 years of my life. It was really difficult, but I learned so much. I think it really kind of a little bit similar, not as hard as your story, but I got beat up to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm a little bit more resilient now.
Mm-hmm.
I could take more risks. I'm not as afraid. Went through some very low moments in my life during church planting. And it was during the time where you were planting all these lighthouses. And you got to tell me how, you said there's no script, but you're planting churches and your churches were growing at a very rapid rate. I didn't understand. During the time I was trying to meet with you. I was like, I wanted to learn, what was your strategy? What were you doing? Why do you think your churches were growing at the rate that it was? And they're very large churches now. How did you do it? Like, what do you think it was?
Well, like I said, it wasn't anything fancy or, I went to church planting conferences. I remember going to one where there was a seminar literally titled "How to Get Butts in Seats," and I was like, "What?" I mean, everything was just so pragmatic, and I understand. I mean, it's not that you can't work on strategies and so forth, but at the heart of it, it's like, why are you doing what you're doing? And I think for me, being very much a people person, if you're not willing to get down into the trenches and just, when it says in Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations, and what does that word disciple actually mean? It's not just taking someone through a book. It's you get involved in their life, you invest in it, you spend time and energy, and you train others to do the same. So, whatever it might look like, whether it's a small group or a one-on-one or just whatever the case might be, invest your life in people, and be willing to share your life. I've let people know the struggles I've gone through because I want them to know, like, I'm just like you. I'm a sinner too. I struggle with very elementary issues too, like anger. I just taught a series on anger at a church, and just let people know, a lot of people have anger issues. And even though I tried to do my best to contain it externally, I shared like, oh no, in my heart, just if you could see what was going on in my heart, there's a reason why Jesus says, you say, you shall not murder, but if you're angry with your brother, you call him a name, you're deserving of going to hell. So, what does it mean to actually love people? When we talk about when Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he goes back to, the Old Testament, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor. And when Jesus says in John 13, love one another just as I've loved you, right? This is the new commandment I've given to you. And it's not necessarily new, but I guess in the sense where Jesus says, love them as I have loved you. So what does it mean to love people with the love of Christ? And there's one passage, 2 Corinthians 5, 14 and 15, where it says, for the love of Christ controls us. So the nuance of that is it compels us. It challenges us to no longer live for ourselves, but to live for the one who died and rose again on our behalf. So if the love of Christ really is the driving motivation, because God has loved you first, right? 1 John 4:19. So this amazing love that God has shown us, that's the love that the world does not know. I mean, I have had people share the most horrific things in their lives. And all I could think of is, thank you that you would trust me to share that. The only answer I can give you is I'm not Jesus. I'm not that one who can save you, but I can point you to the one, and I can share how much he has loved me. And, when people say, well, I've had a bad church experience, and I'll say, oh, so have I. And I'll tell them some of my stories like, and I'm a pretty emotional person, so sometimes I get really worked up. But I'm like, "Are you okay?" And no, I look back, and God was so gracious to me, and the love of Christ has been so profoundly shown to me in ways that I cannot deny. Like my father, when he moved back to LA, that was one of the things I really enjoyed. That I finally got to spend time with my father. And we meet at Whole Foods and take wheatgrass shots together. Yeah. And I was able to share with him all the struggles I was going through, and just seeing him love me through all that. And, he eventually got in a car accident and passed away a few years ago. But, and my mom too, just showing the love of Christ faithfully over all these years, praying for me and supporting me. And then, like I said, especially through my wife and my girls, I can't say that I'm not loved. Even if no one else loved me, I know I have a love in Christ that no one can ever take away, right? Romans 8, nothing can separate you from the love of God in Christ. So that's really what drives everything. So when someone comes to the church, and I know whether it's for a season, a short season, or a long season, love them. Share Christ with them, invest the word of God in them. Just be faithful to do those really basic, fundamental things. And let God do his work to change people's lives. So I'm just the one that gets to be along for the ride.
So you're saying all these things, and I agree with all that. And I think a lot of people are doing those things, but it doesn't quite work the same way as you did. So when were you preaching about this? Was this in your small groups? Did you have it in your membership class, and you were just injecting this love of Christ and expressing that love to others? What was kind of like your first 1, 2, or 3 things that you were doing when you first planted the San Jose one, or even the one in Pasadena?
Well, so like I shared earlier about the MVP statement, the mission, vision, passion, I would preach that actually twice a year to remind everyone, as well as to introduce it to new people. We go through a membership class that was pretty strenuous. I guess you could say it was 8 hours long on a Saturday. And we walked through a membership handbook. So I've kind of put these things all down for them to read, and then to just share. I'll share some of my experiences and let them know why do we do what we do. And said, there's no bait and switch here. What I'm telling you is what we're committed to. And so, I don't know. I have other friends who've tried church planting too, and it didn't work out. And all I can say, I don't know. I can't take credit. I tell people I was probably the worst church planter ever, because the first 2 years in San Diego, I kept saying something like 90% of church plants fail within the first 2 years. So I was kind of basically protecting myself. Like, if this doesn't work, just know that we're just one out of 90%. Church planting is hard. I've talked to people who have gone through, experiences like you. And God's just been kind, merciful. I don't deserve it at all. All I know is I'm just going to try to be faithful with whatever I'm given. When we moved from San Jose, actually a few months before we left to LA, we had a huge traumatic situation where the guy that was going to take over, we just found out that there were a lot of character issues and things. And he ended up leaving the weekend I left, and it just put everything, it was a mess. And I have my last Sunday there, and I just met with the elders and deacons the night before. And they are weeping. They're like, we're losing 2 pastors in the same weekend. What do we do? What's our future? And I remember we decided not to tell them that day. They would announce it the following Sunday. And I remember they had a farewell thing for me, and my heart was just so broken. And so, I look back at the things that have happened. I ended up going back and forth from LA to San Jose for about a year. 3 out of 4 Sundays. So I'd preach San Jose in the morning, and then I'd fly back and preach in LA in the afternoon. And it was a rough time, but all I could think of was, we're just going to take this a week at a time. and trust the Lord. And I look back again and I see the hardships that I was put through was to prepare me for harder things. But it's still the same response. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I call it a plaque verse because, we grew up and there's plaque verses at home. That has become such a real life verse for me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And so it's just trusting that promise. So there have been hard things along the way. I know some people have said, oh, John, you seem so successful in what you've done. One person called me a serial church planter. And I was like, that's weird. I don't like that idea of serial. But it's been an adventure. That motto that I told you that pastor shared with me. I think one day I want to go back to him and say, okay, I've lived it. But it's really all about, faith, being the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, Hebrews 11:1. Again, that's just become more and more of a real truth to anchor in, so that when it's hard, like you said, you just go back to God's truth and realize that I can trust the Lord. He's given me the anchors to carry me through. So whether it seems successful or whether it's hard, in the end, it's part of the journey. I don't know what to expect a lot of times. I've always said every year is the hardest year of my life. Being bedridden because of my herniated discs, I did not plan or anticipate. Even watching my girls grow older, now dealing with them as adults is a whole different challenge. Family life, ministry life, all that, with church planting, could never, like I said, when I didn't write a script, I could never have known how things would work out. But I still stick with, the same guns, just stick to the basics. And I think it was something that John MacArthur shared early on. He said, you just take care of the depth, God will take care of the breadth. And so whatever it turns out, whether it's big or small, I don't care. I've ended up leaving anyway. So it's not really my church in that sense. And I want to pass it on to someone who will be able to really carry on the work. I've always told the associates I've had, I could just die like tomorrow. You need to be ready to continue this work. Not because of me, but we're kind of like the links in the chain. So, I'm passing everything on to you so that you can do this work for the kingdom, for his glory. So
let's switch gears here a little bit, because you went to Masters and you have this unbelievable relationship with J Mac. I see pictures of you guys eating dinner together. I think you grew up with one of his sons or kids. Like, you guys are close friends. Is that true? Or is it his grandson that you grew up with?
So he has 4 kids, and he has 2 sons, 2 daughters. I'm not necessarily close to them, but we went to high school together.
That's right. That's what it was. Right.
And then, we were in youth group together.
Yeah.
So I always saw them, and then we would periodically have dinner with their family. So, like I said, my parents being kind of Korean in that way, they always would want to basically, treat the pastor to things. So my dad, the whole time he was at Grace, he could never call John MacArthur just John.
Yeah.
He would bow to him.
Yeah.
And, but he loved John MacArthur. And, when he passed away, I was cleaning out he had just so many of these notebooks filled with sermon notes. And I ended up having to throw most of them away because it was just too much. But he just loved learning God's word, so, but then just building that relationship. And when my dad was in the hospital, he had a heart attack in 2014. And Pastor John just came, visited. Then he got in a car accident and was hospitalized for about 6 months. And I remember when I called Pastor John, or I texted him, I said, hey, my dad got in a car accident. Just want to let you know. He was there like that night at the hospital with his wife. And so, people only see kind of like, this picture of this guy in the public scene, and they don't know how much of a pastor he really is. So I know that. That's why I call him my pastor still. He has been so kind and gracious. And so when my dad passed away and I asked him if he could preach for our funeral, he was like, of course. And planning the funeral with him was interesting, because I would communicate through his wife because I had her number. And finally he calls me one day and he says, here's my number. Just call me directly. This is, a little tedious.
Don't use Patricia. Don't go to her.
So I remember coming down from, the bedroom and telling my wife, I have his phone number.
That's awesome.
He's my BFF now. But no, he's just been really kind and pastored our family through a lot of hard times.
You have, like I said, you have this unbelievable relationship with him. I always get jealous seeing those pictures. Every Shepherd's, it's like your whole Lighthouse crew gets a picture with him on stage. I'm like, oh man, I wish he was in that picture. It's so awesome. And I like J Mac, by the way. I love him. I love his preaching. He's like one of my favorite preachers. I don't agree with everything he says. I don't agree with everything a lot of people say, but that's okay. And a lot of stuff has been happening these past 2 years with Master's College, with him. How do you internalize that? How do you react to that? What do you kind of decide or think inside your mind when you see all this stuff kind of coming up? I'm a Saddleback, so Rick gets blasted all the time, so I deal with that over there. How do you internalize all that stuff?
Well, I've been accused of being a MacArthurite, and then, I just mimic whatever he says and all. And I tell people, I go, please, at least give me the decency to treat me as an individual. I have a brain. I think on my own.
Yeah.
I understand people not only disagree with him, people get angry with him. And I think it's actually kind of funny. People will text me or message me when they're mad at him. And they're like, why is he doing this and saying this and all that? And they're pretty angry, right? And so I'll respond and say, hey, I don't like to do anything like through email or text. Okay, if you want to talk in person, I'd be happy to. But I just want to encourage you to kind of think about how you're responding or reacting. You're accusing him of being harsh and all that. You sound a little harsh. And so, I said, I can't answer for all the things that he says and does. I don't necessarily know everything behind it either. I'm sure there are reasons, like the whole COVID situation and all that. People are really upset. Like, how could he's going to kill everyone? It's going to be a super spreader. Grace Church is going to destroy California. People would say crazy things. And all I could say is, you know what? All I know is he is a man committed to being honoring to the Lord and to his word. And you could disagree with it if you want, but I'd caution you about your attitude towards how you approach him. And yeah, I would say that to anybody, regarding anyone. Like you said, you go to Saddleback with Rick Warren. I don't agree with some of the things that, he might represent and all, but yeah, to publicly, go after someone and say things, that's why I don't like to engage in that sort of thing. But just let people know everyone's got their challenges. John MacArthur is human. He is not perfect. I'm sure there are things that he, would look back and say, yeah, I didn't handle everything and maybe in the best way. But how about me? And trust that the Lord is going to work in his life to make decisions and to be, he obviously knows there are so many people watching every step. I think it's sad that there are some people that just want to see him ruined. So when there are controversial situations that happen and people jump on that and all over, I think social media has made it just such a terrible, terrible kind of setting where people just pop off and say whatever. And, when in Ephesians 4:21, it says, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, except that which is good for edification according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. I hear a lot of people say, you need to show grace, but they don't show grace, So all I can say is, be careful how and yeah, even though I get to hang out with him here and there, I don't know all the inside workings of how the elders make decisions and so forth. So, remember, I'm John Kim. I'm not John MacArthur. So I don't know why you're coming after me. But I understand. People see, that I've posted that, he's my pastor. I love him. And
you should love him. Yeah. Absolutely. You should love him. I should love him. I should love Rick. We should love each other. Like you said, love one another. Mm-hmm. And I remember years ago, because there is a general stigma about Master Seminary, like this haughty, staunch coming out, I remember years ago at Shepherd's Conference, a friend of mine who's a pastor in North Carolina, went to Masters, he rebuked me. And he rightfully so rebuked me because I was one of those guys, just kind of bashing him as Masters and stuff like that. And that really moved me a lot because I was like, you know what? Yeah, kind of like what you said. How can I bash these people? Whether or not I agree or disagree, but I can't go out and bash these guys and say that. And then you can really say that about any seminary, right? We all know people from seminaries. They come out the same way. And for some reason, we don't react that way. And J-Mac, he's kind of getting up there. You know what's so sad for me is I was watching a Shepherd's Conference sermon. And for the first time in my life, I saw someone helping him up the stairs. And that made me so sad. I was like, oh my gosh. Because even still, he is in like tip-top shape. He's still got like this football physique still. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, man, sadly, we're going to see these greats move on to heaven and see this next phase of ministry. You are hopefully thinking about now a next phase of ministry. You, Ben, Steve. I keep on telling people these next 5 to 10 years is going to be so interesting because we're going to see for the first time Korean American second gen pastors passing the baton. We've never seen this before. It's going to happen. What are you thinking about in kind of the future, your next phase of ministry?
Well, I have been thinking about that a lot, actually. And I'm part of something called the Master's Fellowship, which is centered out of the university. But it's basically kind of this attempt to network and to build relationships, not only with master's grads, but even those outside of master's circles. And so one of the challenges that I think is very new to still the master's setting is how to deal with the Asian American community, and, with all the racial kind of issues going on, social justice and all that kind of stuff. It's not easy to navigate through all that. And so, I've actually been trying to propose how can we reach out to something like 25% of the master's seminary guys are Asian American, but they don't fit anywhere. There's no denomination we fit in neatly, and then you got this reputation issue that kind of follows everyone, which I do understand in some ways, but. So this is actually all very new. So I propose to have an emphasis on Asian American circles. And so I'm officially now the director for the Asian American Ministries Master's Fellowship.
That's awesome.
To help develop that because, I think there are 3 circles of relationships. One is Master Seminary grads that are Asian American that are kind of scattered all over, want to build a support network for them. To encourage, to equip. The second would be Master Seminary grads abroad internationally. So we're talking about like Korea. There's a friend I have in Korea who's wanting to plant a church. So I'm trying to see how can we help provide support. And then the third group would be non-TMS Asian American pastors.
Yeah.
And that is probably the circle I've been just most excited about because when I started going to Talbot with Asian American Demon Program, there's a guy that came up to me and he's like, you're from Masters. Like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I came to learn.
Well, wait, are you a Christian? What are you doing here? Like, wow, I'm here with you guys.
It was pretty funny, and another guy comes up to me and he's like, are you a cessationist? I was like, I just met you first day, right? And I'm like,
all comes out.
Yeah. And he's like, I've never met one before. And I was like, I felt like some endangered animal or something. It was kind of funny, but building these relationships, like this guy who he said he was charismatic. And I said, okay, before we talk and go on, I said, when you hear cessationist, do you hear don't believe in miracles, that, just against all the sign gifts and, that kind of stuff, and, very arrogant and, this and this and that? He's like, yeah, all of that. I go, totally understand. Because when I hear charismatic, I hear, all the excesses and extremes. So, but let me tell you how much I love the Holy Spirit. And I just kind of walk through simple theology of Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
From Genesis to Revelation.
Yep.
And at the end of it, he goes, you really love the Holy Spirit. I can tell. He goes, that's great. But I just realized, even if we do disagree on certain issues, there's something about being able to get past that and to say, you know what, let's focus on the things that we do agree on, and how can we encourage and support each other. Now, that'll differ from person to person, of course. But now I've gotten to know people, all over the country. All they needed was some encouragement. And so giving them time, and then they'll start asking questions like, hey, what would be a good resource for, walking people through, basics and so forth. And I've even gone to some other churches where they've just said, can you just teach our members a simple, ecclesiology so that they can understand what the scripture says about what the church should be? One friend is a 1.5 Korean American, charismatic, egalitarian, but he goes, I love John MacArthur.
Whoa.
Because he really loves the Bible.
Yeah.
And so he invited me to his church several times to speak. And I'm thinking, this is wild.
Yeah.
Like, I go, I'm from Masters, right?
Yeah, you know who I am, right?
But even like when I would go to like the solo conferences and people would go, what are you doing here? I'm like, to learn?
Yeah.
And I go, I know I'm one of the older guys, but I love learning. And I love seeing even the younger guys who are coming up, like guys like you. And that really has to be the mentality. You need to pass on the baton.
Yes.
And you need to be very deliberate and purposeful and encouraging about it. So, I just want to take every opportunity to do that. And as long as God gives me that opportunity, that's what I want to invest in, for the last, I guess you could say, kind of rounds of my life.
Yeah.
I never understood NASCAR. But that Marine guy that was a friend in San Diego, he was really into NASCAR. I'm like, you're just going in circles.
He's going circles.
Right? But then I realized, it is kind of like ministry where you're just going in circles, and there's times where you have to choose. Are you going to go high? You're going to go low? You're going to let someone pass? You're going to draft someone? I learned all this stuff about NASCAR. But it seems sort of monotonous, like just lap after lap after lap. But you need to fill up with gas. So you change your tires. You need to do all those things along the way to get to the point where you can win, right? So I think for me, that was sort of a lesson, just be faithful, stick with your basics, know when you need to adjust. Tire blows out. Okay, what do you do? I mean, there have been so many challenges in ministry, but I think God's been gracious to allow me to learn those things so that I can then pass it on. So the interesting thing at our church is we had several Talbot guys end up going to our church.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is Andy King. And I didn't anticipate that Talbot guys would be the main guys that would end up coming to our church.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's been wonderful, great. And so I realized, well, God, whoever you bring, I want to invest in them and then pass this down. So I don't know how much longer I have. I tell people like church planting is like dog years. So, it's like 7 years for every 1 year. And so, my body feels broken. And at times I'm just kind of wondering how much longer I got. But yeah, God's been so good. So however many more days or weeks or months or years, invest in the future. Psalm 145:4, says, that one generation shall proclaim your works to the next. And I remember learning that when we had to dismiss our children's pastor in San Diego, and it was a terrible situation. So I became the children's pastor for a year. And I remember going to Children's Desiring God in Minneapolis. And I said, talk to me, just talk to me, tell me everything about children's ministry. Yeah. I went to the children's pastor at Grace Church. I went to children. And so the one thing I just really was so profoundly impacted by was you need to invest in the next generation. You need to show them the greatness of God. So by the time I said, I have a curriculum from the nursery. I remember the nursery staff, they're like, what? And it was curriculum from Children's Desiring God, just walking through the attributes of God. One attribute a month. It was the same lesson for four Sundays to just really embed a high view of God, even when they're young, and then to teach the children through all of that. So yeah, if you don't invest in the next generation, don't be surprised that they walk away from God.
So we're trying here at the seminary, as you know, to invest in the next generation, but we have a very large goal here. We're trying to really create a healthier relationship bridge between first gen KM and second, even now third gen Korean American English pastors. Try to get them both from the same church to come to the same school. Right. Big goal, big vision. In all your experience and what you have gone through, all those low moments, all those frustrations, when you hear about this vision, a seminary that's going to try to bring in these two cultures, they're really two cultures, first and second gen, to the same school with the goal of building up that trust and relationship understanding between each other, what do you think is key to achieve that goal? What do we need to figure out, or what needs to happen to really build a healthy relationship between KM and EM?
Yeah, well, one, I think it's a great opportunity and a vision. I think the reality is that everyone needs to be humble. And, 1 Peter 5, when it says, humble yourselves, before the mighty hand of God, do we really take that to heart? Now, being older now for myself, I see the temptation to want to, sort of like press hard or to assert the fact that you're the one in charge kind of thing. And if you just remember that Jesus was the one that said, I did not come to be served, but to serve. And, he washes the disciples' feet, the one who should have had his feet washed, right? So if those who are in leadership are humble leaders who are patient, and I think that's going to be key because, things just don't happen overnight. Those who are going to invest need to really be patient, really be humble, and be willing to be transparent. I know Asian culture does not lend itself towards being transparent. And I think that's one of the things that I wish I had more from the first generation when I was growing up. Because they're human. I know they're going through stuff, but how come they just never shared about it? And so to be transparent, and then the younger generation needs to know that you need to be teachable. You don't know it all. So you need to be humble in that way and receive. And even if you might not understand everything or even agree with everything initially, be careful not just to, I remember hearing, even at Masters, there were guys that would kind of talk back to the professors or, really try to challenge them. Say, I don't agree with you on this interpretation of that, and you just go, okay, that's kind of arrogant for you to go after the teacher like that in front of all the students, try to make yourself look like you know something. So with the opportunities to learn, and I think it's going to just take a lot of time together too. I think having this idea of the first and second generation, even third generations, growing together, learning together. Yeah, that's not going to just happen, from a classroom or a textbook. That's going to happen when you spend time together, share with each other, and learn to understand each other's perspectives. And I really hope that this is something that will really work out. And but I know it's going to take time and patience and a lot of humility on everyone's part. I am hopeful. I really want to see it succeed.
You are pastoring at Lighthouse in Glendale. You are planting churches. You're You got grandkids. I know that recently you just hurt your back. By the way, I pray for you every morning. I pray for healing on your back every morning. And
I appreciate that so much.
You're going through these things. What does life kind of look like now for you? Are you doing a lot of sermon prep, playing with grandkids, things like that? What's kind of going on right now? What do you, Angela, do in your free time?
Well, Angela is a teacher. She teaches online with a charter school. So her life is really busy. But, like I said, she's been the one who is so faithful to support. I just recently, we spent time with our kids over Christmas. And I think one of the things, like I said, just realizing as they get older that we need to still keep investing time in them and not assume anything. God has been so kind. My second and third and fourth daughters, they all go to our church. So, of course, the third and fourth live with us. But my second daughter, Kara, she's married to her husband from the Czech Republic, Vasek, and their son, Benny. It's very much a regular reminder that Benny is now the next generation. So he's like fourth generation.
Whoa. And
so when I see him and I get to babysit once in a while and he's so heavy already and, because my back is not strong, I can't hold him for long, but, I just see, wow, here's this precious gift. I need to pass on the greatness of God. I need to be a grandfather. That's not just, I love to spoil him too. And I love to do all those things that I see grandparents do, but, I need to pass on God's greatness to him. So just even how do we keep investing in our daughters and then now with a grandchild? I think these days I preach kind of in spurts. I did an 8-week series in August, September, and about killed me. So okay, I'm not at full strength. I just preached for 4 Sundays, and so I'm taking a break. So I have to kind of pace myself. And I think it's still going to be a process of kind of recovering. I'm in physical therapy now, so it's getting better. I hope to avoid surgery. So every day is kind of just a day of trying to pick up from, COVID, from, being out of touch with the church for almost a year, being in bed and kind of recovering that time now. It's been exciting. We are going to appoint our first elders.
That's awesome.
We went through a training period for about 6 months, which has been wonderful. Our first deacons and deaconesses. So a lot of things that I had wished we had been able to do earlier, but, for one reason or another, got delayed. So church has been wonderful. Family life, just continuing to grow. And even just the last few days, I've been at the church office cleaning up and, getting things in order so that this new year we can move forward on a lot of things. It's been really good.
That's great. Well, thanks for being here. And I still remember years ago, you had this family Christmas photo where you guys all dressed in like black and white. You had a leather jacket on. Please take more photos like that. That photo was awesome. That family photo was awesome. Do more of those.
Well, my oldest daughter, she's a photographer. And so, and
did she set that up?
Yeah, she did.
That was such an awesome picture.
Yeah, we actually have a picture where she put a background of fire. And we're walking forward, and it's like one of those movie scene kind of pictures. So,
I remember that one too. Yeah.
I posted that, but I will let our family know.
All right.